There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the November 20th meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. The time now is 6:34. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Somerville Community Preservation Committee will be conducted by remote participation. We will have a video recording available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. So Roberta, if you wouldn't mind calling roll, please.
Sure. All right. I will call in the order that I see you on the screen. Jahan,
Here.
Heather,
Here.
Eric,
Here.
Joe,
Here.
Ryan,
Present.
and we are currently missing Laura and David and John Bronnenkamp.
Thank you so much, Roberta. So this evening we have a full agenda, including deliberation on FY25 applications. So I'm going to take the items in order as they're listed in the published agenda. The first item is the approval of minutes from 10/23/2024. I wanted to check with the committee members to see if everyone has had the chance to review the draft meeting minutes and whether anyone has any comments, edits, questions for Roberta. Heather, please.
I reviewed and I had no corrections to make. I'd be
Thank
happy
you.
to make a motion to accept the minutes if nobody else has corrections.
So I do have a quick question, Roberta. This is on page, I believe it's page 3 of the meeting minutes. There's let me see if I could bring this up. On page 3, in the second paragraph, the paragraph that starts with "in response to a committee member question," there's the second sentence that starts with "they serve 40 children ages 2.9-5," and I just wanted to confirm the 2.9-5 whether that's indeed something that you had noted from the conversation, or is this something that I just wasn't following. 2.9-5 ages was not clear to me, I guess.
Yes, that was what they stated in their presentation. I believe that means 2 years and 9 months to 5 years old.
Got it.
But
Thank you
I
so much for
could use
yeah.
a word instead of a dash might be more helpful.
Sure. I mean, if you wouldn't mind, I think that would be it would just provide a little bit of clarity. At least I was confused when I was reading through. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Just wanted to see if there were any other comments or edits or questions for Roberta. Okay. Heather, if you would like to make the motion, please.
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes with the changes noted.
Great. Thank you. Is there a second?
Eric, you're muted. Eric has seconded.
I was seconded it virtually, yes.
Thank you, Eric. Roberta, would you mind calling?
Sure. Joe,
Here. Yes.
David,
Sorry.
Yes.
Jahan,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
and Heather.
Yes.
I believe that is all of you. The motion passes.
Great. Thank you so much, Roberta. So moving right along on the agenda, I think the next item is review fall report. Roberta, if you don't mind sharing the screen and providing us with the insights.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, I am sharing the screen, and there's the fall report. Sure. Okay. Are you able to see the fall report on the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I will go through this as quickly as I can. The purpose of the fall report is to provide you with a clear understanding of the funding availability before you deliberate on the recommendations for this funding round. So the funding availability is the amount of funds that were budgeted at the beginning of the year. Back in June, we voted on the budget for the year based on estimated revenue. So the CPC at that time took the estimated revenue, which was 3.2 million, and applied the percentages share distribution between the program areas of 20% for open space and recreation, 15% for historic preservation, 50% for affordable housing, and 10% for the budgeted reserve, which is a flexible amount of funds that can be used in any of the three program areas. And the maximum 5%, up to 5%, can be used for administration. So applying these percentages, we arrived at the budget that was submitted to City Council and approved. Debt service that has already been committed for historic preservation and affordable housing is subtracted annually from the amount that's budgeted for those categories, which gives us the total budgeted available. So in fact, every year, or in most years, we try to be conservative with the budget so that there are typically additional revenues raised each year above what was budgeted. And those additional revenues are counted and added into what's called the undesignated fund balance. So each year, funds that haven't been allocated to any of those categories because they weren't budgeted are put into the undesignated fund balance. So table 2 shows some funds that were generated in FY24 that were not estimated in the budget. That includes a larger than estimated revenue from the CPA surcharge, and then some miscellaneous revenues from interest on CPA funds, etc. And then the state match was larger than was budgeted. So in 2024. So a total of 617,000 of unanticipated FY24 revenue is added to the undesignated fund balance. And then in addition to that, unspent administrative funds last year, we didn't spend all of the 5% of administrative funds that were budgeted the previous year. So that, and there were no unspent budgeted reserve funds. We spent all of the budgeted reserve funds last year. But these two categories of funding are also added back to the undesignated fund balance at the end of the year. So the total undesignated fund balance is 692,983. And an important thing to keep in mind is that the unappropriated revenue actually cannot be spent until it's been certified the following fiscal year. So this is an amount of funds that we just have to keep in mind has to be left untouched in the undesignated fund balance until next year. So the total undesignated fund balance, actually, I just want, before I move on to give you the total undesignated fund balance, these were the funds that were added to the undesignated fund balance. We also took some funds out of the undesignated fund balance last year. We made an adjustment to the FY24 housing allocation of 75,000. And we funded a portion of the clock tower restoration project and the Somerville Museum FY24 artifact preservation project. So we in total subtracted 365,000 from the undesignated fund balance last year. So the total undesignated fund balance is now $1.7 million starting off this year. And so table 4 is making a recommendation for adjusting the Affordable Housing Trust allocation to maintain that 50% since we've added 692 to the undesignated fund balance this past year. 50% of that to maintain the same balance would be added to the budgeted affordable housing allocation. So that a recommendation that the committee might choose to make to maintain this balance would be to transfer 346,492 into the housing reserve that can then be added to the Affordable Housing Trust appropriation. Now, all of this was very clear until today. And then today I received some news that might change these numbers. So I would suggest waiting until next month to actually make a vote on this. And I will show you the change that was added today. We learned that by some accounting error, the funds so you noticed earlier that each year CPA funds generate interest, and the interest income that goes to the affordable housing funds is supposed to be returned to the CPA every year. That's what is stated in the grant agreement with the Affordable Housing Trust, is that the interest earned on CPA funds that they're holding should come back to the CPA fund. And since FY23, that stopped happening for some reason. So they have kept track of how much interest should have come back, and they're in the process of making a transfer to send the interest back to us that was supposed to be here. But it's not certain yet which account that's going to go to. So it might be that the FY24 and FY23 interest might also be added to the undesignated fund balance, increasing the amount that I just showed you in the report by 94,000. I don't know if you can see that on my screen. I'm sorry, I am not I meant to share.
Okay. So Roberta, we were just seeing the Affordable Housing Trust table. Here we go.
This is the Affordable Housing Trust table. So
Now we
I
can see
wasn't
the, yep,
okay.
we can see the
So
interest calculation. Yep.
yeah, so this is the interest that will be returned to our account, but it's not certain yet. Either the 94,000 will be added to the amount that added to our undesignated fund balance this year, half of which we would want to transfer back to the Affordable Housing Trust, or it may be that this full amount will be, let me give you a quick sum. It may be that the full amount will be added to the revenue next year. So I'm waiting on an answer right now as to how that will happen. So I'll give you the final next month of how this turns out. So that is, I'm going to stop sharing this screen again. So that is a summary of the annual report. Let me just quickly actually go back to the annual report and walk you through a few more things that I thought would be helpful for the committee members to know as you go into your deliberation. I just need to get back to my screen share. Share. Okay. So where we left off, this was the amount of funding that I thought was available and may still be available as of when I prepared this report. And so looking at funds carried over from prior years, another update actually that I should make is that the art farm has actually been appropriated now. That went to city council this past month. And so the art farm is no longer in limbo. It's actually in the queue now um, to um, to be implemented. So, but we still are subtracting it from the funds carried over from prior years because that happened after the undesignated fund balance was carried over. And we still have 150,000 committed to the Adams Magoon House. I suggest we put this on our agenda to revisit after the new year. And then the affordable housing adjustment recommended for this year is also subtracted from what would be the available carried over funds. So that would leave 1 million from the undesignated fund balance. And then there's some open space and recreation reserve funds that are available and a very small amount of historic preservation funds. And I've also given project updates for all of the projects that are currently underway. The first table shows projects currently underway. The second table shows projects that are held for some reason or another. And right now, mainly the Open Space Acquisition Fund and the art farm I included in this. It's appropriated, but they're waiting for completion of the underground utilities, which is pretty far along. So it should be, we should at least have a timeline within the next year for this getting started. And Blessing of the Bay Park construction, they're awaiting completion of design and to obtain the funding and permitting to undertake the entire project. And just to start 24 Webster Street, similar situation. They're awaiting the funding and permitting to start the overall project. And then I've given a list of projects that were completed or canceled, thus funds returned over the past year. And then I just wanted to give a little preview of what we might expect in terms of off-cycle applications. I looked at what are projects that are currently under construction for which there's a potential likelihood of them needing additional funds to complete their projects. Of course, we can never know if some off-cycle application may come forward out of the blue, but a source of off-cycle applications recently has been these projects under construction. So the ones that are potential candidates for future off-cycle applications are the Elizabeth Peabody House, which is construction is underway for their window restoration and other exterior features. Grace Baptist Church, the construction is almost ready to proceed under the 3 grants from 21, 22, and 23. Of course, we've been saying that for a few years, but actually they are about ready to pull the permits to do the work. That's the latest update that I received from their architect. So they spent the last year working out a lot of problems that they had with the way the project was structured. And they've actually spent down all of their ARPA funds now on time, on schedule to pay deposits and purchase the materials that are going to be needed for the project, given that they were behind schedule on the permitting. So they've been able to keep the project structured in a way that they can spend down their ARPA funds and be able to move forward imminently. So within the next year, they'll be under construction and hopefully they have the funds to complete that, but I have to put that now on the list of projects that may potentially be looking for funding to complete their budget. The Somerville Museum construction is nearly complete for restoration of the Bullfinch staircase, which is the last remaining portion of the scope of their FY22 grant of $151,000. And in fact, as of today, I did receive a very small request for additional funds to complete the Bullfinch Staircase project, which I will talk about later. I'll come back to that. And then finally, the City Hall clock tower. Again, hopefully there have been funds identified by the city to be able to complete the construction of that project, but it maybe that's in the category of projects that this might happen. And then there are some other projects that are under construction that are not going to request more funding. Those include Junction Park, Glen Street Community Garden, and Henry Hansen Park. Those are all projects that are nearly finished with completed with funding left over. And then finally, there's a table giving a more in-depth listing of all of the projects to date. And the ones that are shaded in pink are the ones that are still under construction in some way or in progress. So that is the fall report. Are there any questions about this before I close this document?
So Roberta, thank you so much for preparing the report. I know it was a lot of effort, and in particular, also mentioning the potential off-cycle requests. I think it's helpful for the committee members and myself to be aware of where the potential for additional funding requests may come from. I have a couple of questions, but I'd like to defer to the committee to see if anyone has any questions before I do.
I had one, maybe two questions,
Mhm.
perhaps idiot
Sure.
questions. So in the undesignated funds, we're carving out amounts for Art Farm and two other things that hadn't gone forward yet, the Adams Lagoon and I guess one other thing. Is that, there are other projects, aren't there, that are already allocated, like that haven't been done yet, or that are under progress? Would these not have been sort of in a different category? Like, are there areas that might chip away at this and other projects that are not fully funded yet, or?
Once projects have been approved by city council, they are appropriated to their own accounts. So each of
Okay.
the projects that's on the list of ongoing projects has its own account. They don't show up in the undesignated fund balance anymore. The Art Farm does show up because so the 1.7 million is what was in the undesignated fund balance as of essentially last month. And then the Art Farm project has just been appropriated. So I included that on this table. But this is money that's already been subtracted from the undesignated fund balance in the open space reserve. Whereas the Adams Magoon House has actually not been appropriated yet. City Council has not seen the recommendation from the CPC yet because we had set conditions before we send it to City Council, and those conditions haven't been met.
Okay, so until they vote on something, we still leave that amount of money just as potentially to be withdrawn from an undesignated fund. And then-
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you. And then the other question, for the that I'm just blanking the name of the project on Broadway, the preschool, the
Elizabeth Peabody House.
Elizabeth Peabody House. They have 3 different grants from 21, 22, and 23. They're undergoing permitting, so at this point they would have their numbers in hand, wouldn't they? Because they need their final contract amounts for that. So they would theoretically know at this point whether they're going to need more money.
Likely, but if there are change orders, then the budget may increase.
Okay.
That has so far we've seen that happen in a number of projects. So
Yeah, that's fine. I was worried that they got a price back in 2021 for work, and I was like, seriously, they got 3 years later and they're still going to honor that price. So, okay.
On this list, the grant from FY22, I'll give a little update about this is that they had commissioned the structural design from a consultant who then was unable to complete the work because they had a serious health crisis. And so they essentially they got midway through the project and had to start over again with a new consultant, which is why that project has taken so long to complete. And I think that they have somebody now who is finishing that work. So it will finally be completed.
Okay. That was my questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. Are there any other questions? Heather, please.
Is Mud Flats missing from this list, or did that?
That is in the
Oh, there
completed
it is.
projects.
Okay.
$68.
All right.
All right.
I have a question.
Laura, please.
So, the available undesignated funds, just a little over $1 million there, 1,097,000 on page 3. Is that's money in addition to the total available numbers on page 1 that we have to play with? Am I right? I got that
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes. In fact, after we are done talking about this report, I will show the budget worksheet so that we can see how that translates to our
Great.
assessment of what's available.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Are there any other questions from the committee? I'm just going to ask a couple questions. Roberta, one item I wanted to ask about was with respect to the 94,000 that I believe that was for fiscal year 23 and 24, the interest. If it is indeed returned within the time frame, within, let's just say, by next month, is that going to be immediately applied to the undesignated fund balance, or is there going to be a delay in applying it to the next fiscal year?
That's what I need to find out.
Oh.
So yeah, if it immediately goes to the undesignated fund balance, I have actually a whole new set of numbers queued up already for what that would look like. And I can show that to you later if you want to see that in the budget, in the budget worksheet that includes all of the projects. And if the answer is that it's going to count as unanticipated revenue for FY25, then we'll look at it next year. It will
Sure.
be in that this table, additions. Sorry. The additions to undesignated fund balance for 25 is where it might show up next year. So that's if that's the way that they're going to count it, but we're still trying to find out.
Sure. I think that makes a lot of sense, Roberta. And then on a related question would be when it comes to the allocation to the Affordable Housing Trust, if we were to maintain that 50% allocation basis, there would be potential for some impacts, numbers changing there as well. Is that
Yes.
the right? Perfect. Okay.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
So I do agree with your recommendation to tabling any votes until the next meeting when we do have the additional information, just on that basis, because I'd like us to maintain the 50% allocation for the Affordable Housing Trust, as well as having a better understanding of what indeed is going to happen to the interest payments, whether they're going to be applied this fiscal year or the next one, so that way the committee members can make the right determination.
That sounds good.
Great. So those are the questions that I had. I'm going to bring it back to the committee to see if any members have any additional questions, anything else that they would like to ask Roberta.
I just thought of one more. Oh, after you, Heather.
Sure, Heather. I saw Heather's hand first, so Eric, after Heather, please go right ahead. Heather, please.
So I guess another reason for tabling is we don't know what's happening with the Adams Magoon house, or that's a separate update.
The Adams Magoon House will assume that nothing is happening until we revisit it next year, but it won't matter anyway because we're, just like we did with the art farm, we're just going to keep holding it in limbo in the undesignated fund balance until it's resolved.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Eric, please go right ahead.
Just to fine tune, so we recently approved an increase in the CPA tax. At what point does that officially start coming into our balances?
I anticipated that that question would come up eventually this evening. It will begin in FY 26.
Ah.
So that will be July 2025 is when you will see the increased surcharge show up on the tax bill.
And so we wouldn't see that cash infusion to our budgeting until the cycle after next, basically.
Yes.
And that would be basically half.
That
a
would
year's
be-
worth of-
Actually, no, it would be next year's cycle. We would already see that because FY 26, we'd estimate the budget for FY 26 based on the new surcharge.
Oh, right, because we're doing 25 now, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And it will be basically half a year's worth of new tax at that rate that kicks in July.
And at the beginning of the year, we appropriate the entire budget that we think is going to be available, all of the revenue that will be collected. So that would be this table, table 1. We would generate this number based on the new surcharge rate. So that number would double. Where it's $3 million, it would be $6 million under the new surcharge rate.
Okay. Oh, because the fiscal year for the city syncs up with our year for this, so the two cycles align with the taxable fiscal year and then our, but okay.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Wanted to see if there were any additional questions, any other items? Seeing none, so Roberta, thank you. Thank you again for the presentation, for the preparation of this report. The only request that I'll make is that depending on the outcome of the interest repayment matter, if there are updates, if you wouldn't mind for our next meeting, provide us with an updated report, at least the tables that are going to be impacted, should they be impacted. That I think that's just going to be helpful for us for December.
I will do that.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So just going back to the agenda, looking at the next item, and I think this is larger deliberation of FY 25 applications. If you wouldn't mind sharing whether it's the spreadsheet or if you want to go through application by application, we can do it that way as well. But I think it might be helpful if you could show the nice spreadsheet that you prepared that shows the request and the total amounts, so that way the committee members can be oriented towards the dollars aspect of it.
I will do that.
Thank you so much.
I'm opening it right now. And we'll share it as soon as I have it ready. Okay. And you should see on the screen the spreadsheet. So I'll begin with the summary. We can go through the summary and then get into the details. So the total funds available include what was budgeted in each of the categories. That was the table 1, and then the available undesignated fund balance. And then that's the total is $4 million that's available. And so that is we haven't committed anything yet. So we haven't changed the current balance. Requested is a total of $1 million open space and recreation projects, a total of $967,000 for historic preservation, And then the $1.4 million for affordable housing, that's with the adjustment assumed that you would want to make the adjustment. So the total requested is $3.4 million. So that would leave $800,000. If everything was funded, there would still be $800,000 remaining in the undesignated fund. So that's the general overview. And this shows that there'd be a slight amount that would be drawn from the budgeted reserve and from the undesignated fund balance. So
Roberta, so,
Yes.
sorry, if you don't mind just going back, I know you have the calculation around in column H, potentially available for off-cycle applications. Do you mind speaking to that as well?
sure, sorry, I have to move you all around on my screen so that I can see that column.
That's the
So
206,841. Yep.
So this is subtracting, I believe, I need to go to the detailed to remind myself how I derived that. So this is FY7, so F7 minus, I'm sorry, it's F7 minus grant tracking detail M33. So let's go to M33.
Sure.
So M33 is the amount of unappropriated revenue from FY24 that we cannot spend this year. So that was 617,000. So that leaves 200,000 above the absolute minimum that has to be left in the undesignated fund balance.
Understood. Thank you so much for clarifying, Roberta. I think that's an important distinction here.
So, just reviewing, I'm gonna see if I can, yeah, there we go. Reviewing what's on this spreadsheet, just so that we can keep in mind how the model of what you might fund relates to the funding availability. So we derive using the total undesignated funds, we subtract and derive that 1 million that we saw on the report. And that 1 million goes into the total available. So the sorry, I don't. So the sorry, so the total available, the rows 16 through 21 has what was budgeted, and then what's already in the reserve accounts that was carried over for historic preservation and open space and recreation. It's not counting the undesignated fund balance yet. So the total available in each of these program areas, then what is requested. And then if you were to fund the entire amount, you would need to take $45,000 out of the budgeted reserve. And then if you were to fund the entire amount for historic preservation, 571,000 would have to be split between the budgeted reserve and the undesignated fund balance. And so that's what this calculation is what the split is that gets you to the amount that you would need for historic preservation. So we draw from the budgeted reserve first, and anything that goes beyond what's available this year, we have to draw out of the undesignated fund balance. So that's how that calculation works. And so we'll go up to now the amount that's requested for each of the projects. And what I need to add to this discussion now is what I mentioned earlier about the Somerville Museum. They made a request, which is reflected in a memorandum that I just put into the meeting packet before the meeting started. And I will pull that up on the screen. And that is that the Bullfinch Staircase project, in fact, they will be looking for additional funds to complete the Bullfinch Staircase project of $20,000. Am I sharing the screen? No, I'm not sharing this on the screen yet.
Not yet.
I'm gonna switch to share the memorandum. So completion of the Bullfinch Staircase project. They have a quote for $20,000, $20,250. And I believe that they are also, oh, I think that they have
It's
two
the
quotes.
18,000 plus the general contractor's overhead and profit that brings it up to 20.
Thank you. And then they wanted to add
Plus a contingency.
a contingency. So the total that they're asking for is 24,300. So I want to be respectful of the committee's process. This request was literally submitted today. And so you obviously haven't had the opportunity to look at it yet, and you wouldn't be voting on it this evening anyway, because right now you're just going to be conceptually looking at all of the requests. But what the committee may want to consider is whether you would accept this as either an off-cycle request or an amendment to their application. And either way, it's up to the committee whether we should include that additional 24,300 into the request for the Somerville Museum's
So,
application.
so Roberta, just a quick clarifying question. If the committee were to consider this request for the staircase, the $24,300 amount as added to the regular funding cycle request, would the Somerville Museum be required to complete an application form or some sort of addendum to the application form? Is there a formalized process that they would need to undergo?
That's a very good question. It would depend on whether you want to consider it as an off-cycle application or an amendment to the application that is already in front of you. As an amendment, I would say the memorandum and budget is essentially the process that we've asked for applicants making an amendment. But if it is if it's an application, then we would want to have a full application form that goes with it.
Understood. That's very helpful. Thank you, Roberta.
Hi, I have a quick question, John.
Yes, David. Please, David, go right ahead. Thank you.
Is there a definition? Is there like kind of a threshold of when something can be amended and when it's off cycle?
That is a very good question. I think we haven't encountered this exact situation before, so we can, it's, I think, up to the committee's discretion to set a precedent this evening of how you would handle a request like this.
Sure. That's a great, I think that's a great question, David, and I think we should, as a committee, have a conversation around this. I do see Ryan's hand, and I think Laura, you also have a question as well.
Go ahead, Laura.
Oh, please.
Okay, I mean, in terms of this question that David just raised, it's just sort of my grant writer's intuition, just, you know, doing this professionally, makes me want to consider this an off cycle, because the the deadline was quite some time ago. I have a feeling that makes things harder on the museum. And also I wonder if there's but at the same time I also think we need to look at numbers like what are we going to come up against if we have an additional 24,000, whatever that was, 23 and change. And then in all fairness to the other applications on the table, it feels like it wasn't submitted on time. Again, it's because of what I do professionally. I could never get away with minutes
I'm
being late.
also thinking of like in a kind of a transparency context, and I don't know whether there's any difference in that regard, but I just feel like, you know, if you submit an application, you give us number X, and then you sometime down the road say, well, it's not really X, it's X plus Y.
Mhm.
You know that it feels like a little bit like you're moving the goalpost.
Yeah, that's a good expression.
Right. I think I'm inclined to agree with you, Laura. I mean, I would certainly like to hear other folks, other members' thoughts as well. But I do think that it was a deadline, and just for equity, equity reasons alone, all the applicants that have submitted their budget requests with a X number
Right.
listed, it shouldn't be X plus Y, to David's point. So I'm definitely inclined with that viewpoint. But Ryan, please, would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think broadly, I think I'm going to be kind of a Debbie Downer on some of these applications tonight in terms of what was submitted, but I feel like this needs to be papered appropriately. I don't think it's appropriate to just forward bills to this committee. I don't think it's a good use of taxpayer dollars to not have a formal review process. So I would be firmly in favor of this being an out of cycle, truly a true out of cycle application with all necessary forms, and then happy to look at it. Obviously, Somerville Museum's a great partner, and go from there. But that's where I'm voting.
Great, thank you so much, Ryan. Eric, do you have
I
comments?
concur. I think as to the question about when something could be considered amendment, to me, that would really only be applicable if the application they already applied was more or less within the same vein of that. Like if they'd already submitted an application to do the painting of the staircase and the actual numbers got changed, or the consultant said you needed to add a little bit of scope to it. But this is completely unrelated, I think, to what they already have in the system for us, as I understand.
That's a very good point, Eric. I'm also inclined to agree, and would love to hear any other thoughts from committee members. So Roberta, I know we're going to start deliberations, but with respect to this Bullfinch staircase matter, is it advisable for us do we need to take a vote, or can we just provide as a committee recommendation that you could convey to the applicant, Somerville Museum? I'd love to get this item resolved, since we appear to have a general consensus here.
Sure, I think that it's sufficient for me to just give feedback to the applicant that you'd like to see a full application from them in addition to the memorandum. So I will convey that back to them, and either way, you weren't going to vote on a funding recommendation until next month anyway. So you just would like to have the complete documentation to accompany their off-cycle request next month.
That would be great, Roberta. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is very helpful input on how to handle this unprecedented situation.
Right. Probably
Right.
won't be the last time, right?
So in full disclosure, I want to, before you begin talking about all of the applications, I would like to flag that the Veterans Cemetery, in your meeting packet, the supplemental material, they submitted what is essentially a very substantial scope change after the feedback that they received at the presentation. So at the presentation, there was a lot of concern about the need for them to engage a a historic preservation conservator to evaluate the cemetery before developing a scope for construction. So they went ahead and reached out to a conservator who submitted a proposal for an analysis that they would complete first. And let me pull up the materials that they submitted.
I think it has the wrong budget summary attached to it. I think it has like something from PSEF.
Really?
Right.
Mhm.
I noticed that
Oh.
as well. Yep.
I'm so sorry. I tell you what. And that's very unfortunate because we worked together to complete that budget summit.
And to me, this is, this is an amendment to the application because we had a discussion about these concerns and therefore they amended their proposal. It has a whole sort of lineage that that falls into place.
Yeah.
Right.
I was glad to see this.
So yeah, I wanted to make sure that the budget, which I will go ahead and correct that as soon as I'm not also trying to talk at the same time. So they're requesting funds for the study, 18,500. It summarizes on the first page what they're requesting. So 18,500 for the study. And then they'd like to request an advance commitment of $100,000 toward the first phase of construction, which will be determined by the study. And the purpose for the advance commitment is that it will enable them to apply for state or federal grants that require a match, so that they will have a larger match to be able to increase what they can ask for from those programs. So that, and then they anticipate coming back next year to make an application for further construction. And then they've included a contingency just because I'm advising all of the applicants that a contingency is better than coming back and asking for more funding every time the project isn't completed.
Roberta, how does this number compare to their original application?
So let me pull up the,
It was
This
plus
is like, I feel like we're on the
10,000.
slope between these two subjects. Like when is
Yeah.
it that they come in and we say this is an out of cycle, and when is it an amendment, which is okay within the context of an application cycle?
Mhm.
And to the Veteran Services Defense, if they're responding to the comments we made, that seems it's kind of like we asked for it.
Mhm.
Or at least we invited them to do so.
Mhm.
Which makes me think that these conversations should be occurring before the application deadline, not after.
Yeah. I had tried to set up the process so that the discussion with the HPC would happen earlier in the application cycle. And it didn't work out this year. Actually, another update that I should give you all is that HPC met with each of the applicants for historic preservation last night. And before they did vote to determine that the elements that are described in the Veteran Services application are significant to Somerville's history. So that meets the eligibility criteria. And the HPC will be submitting a letter with comments for each of these projects before our next meeting. So I had tried to have that happen earlier in the process, and I'll try again next.
No, I mean, I'm aware,
Yeah.
every year this timing thing is really fraught, so it's not, so I'm sensitive to the challenges I'm trying to figure out how do we kind of thread the needle, you know, between saying these revisions are okay and these revisions aren't.
Mhm. And I have been looking up the number to answer your question about the Veteran Services request, and it looks as though their original request, I feel as though that's still too low. I've got to open their original application, so my apologies, I didn't have that at the ready.
No
The
problem at
full-
all, Roberta. I know you're juggling with a lot of files this evening, so not a problem.
One small screen and many
Yes,
things
indeed.
happening. So the I do have a different version of the. Am I still sharing screen with you all? I can't
Yeah.
even tell.
You are not.
You're not.
Okay. All right. I will share the screen so you can see the correct budget that I have on my screen right now. I don't know how the wrong budget got into that file. But the and this funding request is different from, am I looking at the correct? So this is the old budget summary form. So it was 145,463 that they had requested based on the old version of their scope.
Okay. So
And
So it looks like they went down a little bit in construction, they added a comprehensive survey.
yeah.
Yeah.
And this says, I'm very confused with numbers. So I'm going to have to do some cleaning up of this application for you for next time. I see that I have numbers and pages all over the place that are not what would be helpful for you to see. So for the next time, I'll make sure that I have what the original request was, what the revised request is, and that I have the correct budget forms in all of the documents that you can see.
But for me, like kind of in the context of the two projects we've just discussed,
Yeah.
I feel like we need to kind of decide if we have the applicants come and present to us after they've submitted an application and we give them feedback and then they revise, you know, what they're asking for in response to our feedback. Is that fine? And secondarily, how is that different from what the Somerville Museum did? And it seems like I think there is enough difference there because it seems like Somerville Museum kind of wasn't responding to anything we gave them. They just kind of said, "Oh, and now we've got this other thing too." But I just think that it's important for us as an institution to be able to like parse that difference.
So I feel like that this is a case where with the Veterans Memorial that we asked them questions, we raised some concerns, and they adjusted their budget and their proposal to address those concerns regarding that grant application. Whereas with Somerville Museum, the Bullfinch Stairs are even in an older grant that's not even in this year's cycle. And so it's really an off-cycle request pegged to a different grant, pegged to a different cycle, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that, Heather.
Whether that needs the full application or whether it's like it's an out of cycle request, but that going back to the grant that helped with the Bullfinch Stairs versus this year's grant cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I definitely think that there's some great thoughts shared here. And David, thank you for raising the question. You know, I would love to hear more thoughts and opinions because in my mind, I do see a distinction, you know, with Somerville Museum on with respect to the Bullfinch staircase, and in this case with the Veterans Cemetery, we did provide feedback. So we as a committee, we as a group provided feedback, and they were in some measure responding to our feedbacks. But I'm not entirely sold on it. If anyone has a dissenting view or a differing view, I'd love to hear it. It would be, I think, helpful for us to engage in that conversation.
To me, it's still fairly cut and dry. I think the changes to the cemetery, their request, it's the same proposal. It's just more a matter of
Right.
how you slice it and how they're going about it. The Somerville Museum, it's a completely different scope from what they've applied for this year. Their scope was what, furniture restoration and more to do with artifact or objects. Not to dismiss their need for this, it's just it's harder to create this being an amendment to what they're looking for this year. So
Right.
I don't have much nuance to that. I think it's pretty closed.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said. I don't know if it warrants, I don't know, the committee or Roberta in your role, somebody writing up something to sort of outline these differences, what amendment versus new application. But I agree with the sentiments that have been expressed already, that these are different situations. I don't need to say what's been said already, but it might be that something should be written up to
Yeah.
clarify.
Yeah,
what
I
we-
really appreciate that clarity, and I can certainly add that to our procedures manual. That is a back of the house document that helps me to keep track of the way we've done things.
Right. I just wanted to see if there were any other thoughts related to this matter before we can move forward to the deliberations on the individual applicants. Anything else, whether it's the topic at hand or anything else that I know, Roberta, you've presented a lot of data, a lot of numbers. Any if anyone wants to go back to the schedules, the spreadsheets, or anything else that we may need to consider just from a high level overview in terms of what we have available, in terms of what's been budgeted, what the funding looks like, anything at all. So I'm seeing none. Roberta, if you don't mind, whichever order you think it's best for us to go through the individual applicants and their budget requests, I think that might be helpful.
Sure, I will share the document again. And the only other thing that I would mention is if you paid very close attention to the meeting packet, there were also supplemental materials provided for the Nunziato Park and Quincy Street projects, but those were not changes. Those were just providing the budget information that the CPC requested because their applications were not perfectly clear.
Thank you, Roberta, for that clarification.
So with that, I will defer to the committee how you would like to to begin with the deliberation. We did add a column for priority, and a suggestion for how we could go about beginning this would be to have, so the way that I've seen this done in the past was to assign a 1, 2, or 3 to the priority column, which would be to indicate 1 is you strongly agree, 2 is you agree with reservations, 3 is you think that this is probably a candidate to pass on for this funding round. And so I would invite perhaps the committee members to discuss what each of you feels would be the appropriate priority that you would add to this request. And if they're invite you to make comments about each of the individual projects if there are specific caveats that you would want to keep in mind about whether you would prioritize funding for those projects. So I'll pass it back to you, Jahan, to indicate how you think you'd like to proceed with this discussion.
You're right. Thank you, Roberta. I think the priority column is very helpful for multiple reasons. In particular, I think it's going to help us when we come back for the December meeting and actually look towards voting to fund the applicants either in whole or in part. So I think we can just go down the list. And we could just start having conversations one by one, with the understanding that the last item, that's row 12, Affordable Housing Trust, that's 50% allocation, unless, I mean, I would welcome committee members to discuss, but I think it's not a specific project. So I think we could give a little bit more priority to the I'm going to call it the open space recreation and the historic preservation projects, the individual applicants, where individual applicants have sent in their materials and done presentations. So if we go down the list, we can start with 12 Pleasant Avenue. Roberta, I'm going to ask you to just provide us with a brief synopsis, just so there are a lot of projects that we just want to make sure that we can use that as a starting point for the discussion.
Sure. So the 12 Pleasant Avenue is the Somerville Community Land Trust, and their project was to do historic restoration of a property that they are rehabilitating for purposes of creating affordable housing. So most of the work that is included in the budget that is given of $395,000 is for exterior work. There was a small amount that was for structural work, and a little bit of interior work. And it had been, I thought, an interesting suggestion that was brought up last week or last month in the presentations, that the committee consider perhaps dividing this between historic preservation and affordable housing, electing to use some of the budgeted reserve to cover the affordable housing, to cover some portion of this that you weren't sure you wanted to use historic preservation funds for. So with that, I'll leave it up for discussion.
Great, thank you, Roberta. And I think that nuance is also key, particularly as we look at the allocation based on, I'm going to call them categories, whether it's historic preservation or affordable housing. So with that said, I wanted to see if anyone has any questions, thoughts, comments. How do they feel about, from a priority perspective, whether it's something that they lean strongly towards allocating priority 1, 2, or 3. Just want to hear your thoughts here. Heather, please.
So, well, my feeling is that it's a good grant application. We should be awarding them some money. I do question, they had like $46,000 in their contingency, which they said was based on the overall preservation part of it, but it's not 10% of the grant or something, which just to me, that's like a whole grant application for other people. It's a lot to just sort of park in contingency, and also once we move that, once that's in historic preservation, that's where it remains. And now that we have enough, that the budget has all changed and we have more money for this year, I guess I don't want it, just because we have more money in the purse this year than I thought when I was originally kind of looking at these, just be sort of like, oh, it doesn't, fine, $46,000. I personally feel that we should reduce the contingency that from the grant award, and we could decide what we think is right. And then I do also feel like a portion of it can come out of this sort of give back that we're giving to affordable housing. Because I just feel like it sort of starts to screw, like we've got this pie of how much we want to spend in all these categories, and then we take all these undesignated funds and pump them into historic preservation. And I just feel like it distorts the pie. So I feel like in order to try and kind of honor those allocations, that if we could A, reduce the ask a little bit, and B, take some from the historic affordable housing, that would be good.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. Wanted to see if anyone else has any thoughts.
I guess
Eric,
I would
please.
concur that the project is a nice one, and it's always good to have a project that, I know we like to focus on things that blend, it kind of grab multiple angles in affordable housing and preservation. So I would obviously go along with this, and I think that the need is probably a high priority, and that they probably need this money sooner rather than later to get the project to move forward. So it's not like just a thing that's going to sit in their living room for years and years to get worked on someday. And I think your point about that, the contingency is good. They're design contingencies and then construction contingencies, and I don't know what they would apply this towards, if they're still developing the scope and they need this for that, or if they're looking, if they have that finalized. They do have a good consultant advising them on this, which is reassuring. And I guess I would concur with that. If it's interior, if it's stuff that's more just stabilizing the building, that's to me a little bit more to do with the affordable housing, the underlying project involved, as opposed to preservation of what you see from the street. We do have precedents for where we do fund stuff inside, like usually to do with access, elevators, and accessibility and things like that, or the Peabody House. So I guess there is a precedent for us to fund interior stuff like that. That's where I'm leaning with that.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. Any other thoughts regarding 12 Pleasant Street? I'm sorry, Pleasant Avenue.
I think splitting the allocation between the two categories is really important, actually, because sort of seconding what Heather was saying about the pie being distorted. That way it's truly representative of how the money's going, and that we're closer to meeting this allocation that we have, that we're striving for too. It helps us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura. Ryan, I see your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm generally in favor of this application. I agree that I think it's two separate goals, right? This is a preservation project, and it's adding 6 units to the income and rent restricted housing stock of the city. So I also am in favor of potentially splitting the ask. A distinction I did want to make or ask about that maybe is just me not understanding, this will apply to all the projects that we look at tonight and this year. I'm seeing on the budget summary form template that we say a 15% contingency is strongly recommended for all construction projects. That's note number 3 in the first table. If you scroll down then to page 3, which is 3 of their submission, which is the application budget form, there's the limit of contingency no more than 10%. Just wondering what the precedent is for that. And I had in my notes to flag a bunch of these applications for being over 10% on contingency, but if it's actually 15, maybe I can delete some of those.
I appreciate that, and that is totally an oversight on my part. I took the template actually from somebody who had been a grantee in other communities and thought this would be useful. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I'm on the fence about whether to continue using that budget template, but the budget summary is really helpful because it gives us very succinct information that we need.
Yeah, great.
Sometimes we need more than what's on the budget summary, and so the detailed version was an attempt to kind of guide people, but yeah,
Gotcha.
if they should be consistent anyway. And the recommendation for contingency is that they should include enough contingency that they don't have to keep coming back to ask for more money to finish projects that are already underway. That's the hope.
Sure.
And so you have experience in the industry, so I think that if you or your colleagues on the committee have a recommendation for what is adequate contingency is, that would be, I think, taken to advice.
Yeah, sure. Happy to opine on that. I think generally my takeaway here is since these forms were used by the folks that, went through the application process for this year, when evaluating these, will probably be just considering these more guideposts rather than any rules to be broken. And I would think that other people probably feel the same way about that, although people can correct me. In terms of contingency amounts, 10% is usually what we try to hold for hard costs for a historic project. Usually it's whittled down to 5 for a new construction project, but I also understand these are smaller dollar amounts. One weird invoice one way or another can run roughshod over that pretty quickly. So 10 and 15, I don't really have a problem with either one at this dollar amount. I think 15 is fine as a maximum. Just my 2 cents.
Sure. Thank you, Ryan. Any other comments, whether it's about the 10 or 15% contingency or regarding 12 Pleasant Avenue?
Yeah, I have 2 questions, and again, they're more general than 12 Pleasant Avenue, but and also going back to Ryan's point. I agree that I think that these are more like guideposts, and when we say we strongly encourage, that means we're strongly encouraged, but certainly it's not required, right? Because we said we use the word encourage. But the other thing, while this isn't something I have day in and day out experience in, my sense is, I don't know whether it's calmed down over the last year or two, but for a couple of years, of course, inflation costs and being able to get stuff in was really crazy. And I don't know whether it's settled down in the last year and a half and it's a little more stable now, or whether it's just as crazy. But my sense was kind of, not that this is something we can use as a hard and fast rule, but if they had a consultant come in and give them an estimate 3 years ago, that's really different from an estimate that they got a year ago. So if they're just getting to us, with an application, and they had a builder or a designer or an architect or whoever, give us an estimate that's a few years old, well then almost certainly 15% is probably conservative. Where if they just did it this, if the estimate came in a few months ago, hopefully it's not so conservative. So I don't know. And like I said, I'm not really sure what we can do with that insight, except recognize, that life changes.
I might just add a little bit of observation based on the point that you raised, that if you look at the table that was in the report on the projects that finished under budget, in recent years there have been several projects that requested about the right amount or a little bit more than what was needed to be able to complete their projects. And the PSUF has been doing a great job of really accurately estimating what their projects are going to cost. They have also been working on finding other revenue sources. So some of their projects have been coming in under budget because after the CPA funds were committed, they were able to apply other revenue sources to complete projects.
And Roberta, I appreciate it, because you're also reminding me another point I wanted to make up, which is even, I feel, a little bit more slippery, is if we encourage someone to come in and give us a 15% or even higher, contingency, do they kind of find that as like, do they think of it as found money? I mean, do we ever get that money back, or do they just kind of put in gold toilet bowls, because they got all this money and they don't want to give it back?
I think we typically get the money back. PSUF has definitely returned all of the funds that they haven't needed to complete their projects.
Because that also makes me more comfortable about awarding, making awards with higher contingency if we feel like there's a pretty good record that when they actually don't spend all that money, we get it back as opposed to them finding a way to spend it.
There is a requirement in the grant agreements and memoranda of agreements that the unspent funds are returned to the CPA budget, and that the funds cannot be spent on anything that's not eligible. So presumably everything has been vetted in the
Yeah.
scope, and that they aren't spending anything that's not already in the scope.
Yeah, no, and if folks are coming back and saying, "Hey, guess what? It cost us 50,000 less than we expected," we can't answer more than that.
Do you ever get people that are giving you breakdowns of what contingencies were when they gobble them up? I mean,
Well, typically the Somerville Museum, for example, rather than contingencies, they've been coming in to request additional money for change orders for their projects. And so we see in detail what those change orders are that have driven the increase in budget.
Okay.
So in that sense, we've seen it. And that's the one instance where I've seen the detail of what went into the change in budget, because these other projects where they had the contingency in place, it hasn't been necessary for me to follow as closely how they use their contingencies.
It's a little bit squishy, I suppose. Like a project like this, I could see them saying, gee, we're 85% done and we have this contingency left. Maybe we ought to restore these. We didn't think this needed to be replaced, but we've got the money, so let's replace these brackets, or, just do something they didn't think they really needed to. So it's sort of a scope expansion on the last minute. But this is a particularly, I think the preservation side of this project is a little bit bigger than some of the other ones we're dealing with. Typically, it's a lot of little tentacles there. So to go back to the main question, I think a 15% contingency is probably not a bad idea. And hopefully we get some of that back.
Great. Thank you so much, David and Eric. Heather, I noticed that you had your hand up earlier. Please go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, I believe the way that grants are administered is that the city holds the grants and the grantees have to submit for payments. And so all of these submittals for payments on their grant are being reviewed and processed as they come in. So it's not like they get a big purse of money and they just manage it and we trust them to manage it and spend it on the right things. It's audited as the grant is dispersed. So just to kind of put that out there, but it does, if we borrow money to put into historic preservation from undesignated, it will stay there even if it gets returned, so it gets flipped over into historic preservation and there it will lie until it gets used. So that's just one reason why I wonder about it. I think for me, contingencies often vary based on where you are at the project, whether you're at a sort of more schematic beginning part of the project, you don't really quite know what all is going to be revealed, versus at a place where it's pretty well sussed out and you should have a pretty good handle on where the questions may lie or where the issues may come up. And it seemed to me that they'd had a lot of input, both architecturally and from structure, and they had a pretty, very solid package in terms of what they were dealing with there. So, I mean, it's an old building. It's true. You might open something up and find out that you have to go farther to fix the problem than you thought. But that's my 2 cents on the on that topic.
Thank you so much, Heather. Any other thoughts, comments?
I just want to make sure that we can move the discussion along so that we
Yes.
don't get exhausted with this. So you will make a vote next month. And what I'm hearing is that this is a high priority project. I'll put a 1 in that column for this. And that I might take a close look at the budget and give a proposal month of what it might look like if we were to split this project between historic preservation and affordable housing. And the affordable housing would come out of the budgeted reserve rather than the affordable housing allocation. So it won't affect how much we give to the trust. It's just that for this project, you can draw out of your flexible funds to consider part of this project to be a affordable housing contribution.
Right, Roberta, and also I would just like to note Heather's point regarding the $46,000 contingency. I'm gonna have to go back and calculate that out, but in general, the consensus is that 15% contingency is reasonable, just on a percentage basis.
Okay. So
Great.
you can decide on the actual amount next month if you want to keep it the same or reduce it. And if you want to adjust what I suggest for the split for historic preservation versus affordable housing.
Sure, I think that sounds great. So Roberta, we can move on to the next item.
Mm-hmm. And the next item, sorry, I need to shrink you guys so I can see my screen again. Is the 50 Bow Street brickwork project.
Ryan, I see your hand up. Please go right ahead.
I'm in full support of this. I think the application is complete. They got a quote that looks reasonable to me. I think this is a great use of the funds, and I have no further questions about this one.
Great, thank you so much, Ryan. Roberta?
Yes, thank you for recognizing me. This is a project that it might have been helpful for me to have also given a little bit of a preamble to this project. I just had reached out to our law department and to Stuart Saganor of the Community Preservation Coalition. Also today, a lot of very last minute information to add to your consideration this evening. And just to make sure that we're comfortable with how a grant would be structured to a condo association and the eligibility of the project. And I received a helpful comment from Stuart Saganor that I just want to throw out to all of you to shape your consideration of the project. I don't think that there's a clear yes or no, but I just want to make sure that you're thinking about this. And that is that especially so one of the things that I determined with the legal department is that it would be very difficult to put a permanent deed restriction on this project, but we could consider a term limited deed restriction on it, which is not worth as much as a permanent deed restriction. It does offer another higher level of protection than the existing LHD, the local historic district that this is under. But given that you would, because of the condo association, you would need to consider it to be to have a term limited deed restriction. They would urge extreme caution on around the anti-aid amendment of the state constitution. The anti-aid amendment prohibits using municipal funds to benefit an individual or an organization's operations. And so what he suggests is that you want to make sure that the project has a clear and compelling public benefit. And that the facade improvement is obviously something that you have, it's visible from the street. So you may deem this to be a clear and compelling public benefit for the historic preservation. But I just wanted to make sure that you have that advice in mind as you deliberate. So back to you.
Thank you so much, Roberta. I think that's very helpful background information. In light of the updated information that Roberta has provided, I wanted to see if there were any reactions, any thoughts, whether to the information or the applicant itself, the application itself, rather.
Just as a reminder, so this was just for the brickwork improvements of the front of the building, right? They funded the other three sides on their own.
Correct.
And how would us funding this be different from us funding the visual side, you know, the publicly available side of any historic building in Somerville?
This is comparable to the Adams Magoon House in that it is a private residence.
But the Adams Magoon House work was interior.
The Adams Magoon House work was going to be for window restoration.
Yeah, I thought there was an interior component of it.
No, they were going to have a preservation restriction that extended to the interior. But the actual work that was being done was going to be
So the distinction is primarily that it's privately owned.
privately owned. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
And this is essentially privately owned as well, since it's a condominium.
That's right. No, I understood that. That's what I mean. That's what it has in common with the Adams Magoon.
Because we couldn't, I think that's what Roberta was saying. For Adams Magoon, we have this 50-year clawback where if they sell it, we get the money back. And
Right, except we haven't, yeah, except we
how would
haven't
you do that with
succeeded.
a
We haven't,
condo, it's harder to say like, well, you sold your condo unit, we want 1/26 of the, how would we do that?
The 50-year clawback, I think, would be it would be impossible to apply to a condominium. And it was also the sticking point for why the Adams Magoon House hasn't been able to move forward. So just that's something to discuss at another time, the Adams Magoon House. But I just wanted to consider that that precedent that you established and what is a feasible requirement to place on private residences to receive HP
but the
funds.
benefit to the public here, to the
Mhm.
extent there is one, in terms of the preservation of the historic facade of the building, we get irrespective of whether, individual owners ever, sell their units, right? Like I'm not really sure I see the same concern that we had with Adams Magoon about, the homeowner, taking the $150,000 and then selling the house and walking off with $150,000 in additional, value. So I'm struggling to kind of figure out what our downside is. And that's not to say that I don't think there is one, but I'm struggling to understand it.
Thank you, David. I think that's a great question, and I'm inclined to agree with what you're saying. I mean, there is a public benefit, a continuing public benefit. Although one can make the argument, and I'm maybe arguing against myself here, is that any improvements that are funded, whether the individual condominium owners end up selling, they're still benefiting, deriving some sort of monetary benefit from the sale because the exterior is more appealing.
Well, I'm sorry, not to interrupt. I'm interrupting, but I guess the benefit is that they're not having to do a special appraisal to the condo owners in order to do the front of the building. We're subsidizing that.
Yes, that's true.
And I guess the question is if we didn't do that, would they still have to do it? If this is an historic building, would they have to do it consistent with, some historic preservation guidelines, irrespective of whether we gave them money or not? Or could they put aluminum siding on?
Well, as the historic commission guy, they couldn't, they have to repoint it. I don't know if there's any nuance to how they do it, if it can be done more sloppily.
Yeah.
Because at our meeting last night, we discussed in pretty heavy detail exactly what repointing would entail for this property and the kind of the mortar characteristics and how the workmanship and stuff like that.
Right,
because
because
require that.
to me, that's the crux of it is if we're having them do something, or we want them to do something other than they're legally bound to do, do we want to entertain subsidizing that work?
That's
Yeah.
a fair point.
I think that's a key question, David, for the committee members to consider.
Because hypothetically, somebody else could jump in and say, like me, I have a historic house. If I want to do my do my porch, you know, I could come and say, well, why don't you fund me? You did them.
Yeah.
You're also,
Yeah.
So we have to have a certain level of both this property and Adams Lagoon are particularly important, and it's sort of it's subjective. It's a
Right. And I
Yeah.
recall, Eric, when we were talking about Adams Lagoon, it was, can we distinguish when the owner of the you know, the house next door, which is almost an old and almost not, you know, like why are we offering it to the owner of that building and not the building next door or any other building in town? You know, like, can we defend the decision? You know, is there a logical distinction? Because otherwise it's just kind of a slippery slope, and it seems like, you know, there's not really a method to our madness.
Well, I think we often kind of rely on the historic commission to in their letters to us, you know, to kind of indicate how important or how valuable of a resource they see it to the community.
Right,
And
my recollection is we got that
we've
specific.
relied on them to be that litmus test rather than taking it on ourselves.
Right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we specifically requested that for Adams Lagoon, you know, for the historic preservation committee, to kind of say, and this is why this building is different. And the question is do we have the same thing for 50 Bow Street?
I don't think we. I'd have to check with Sarah.
Not yet. They met last night, right?
Yeah, but we didn't take a vote to declare it.
Yeah.
And
To me, I think that's kind of a threshold question.
Yeah. And I agree with David. I think that is probably really the best we can do is require some guidance from the Historic Commission to determine which projects rise to a certain level of, I mean, obviously we can't tell you, wearing two hats here, but we can't make a recommendation of how much to give somebody, but we can tell you this is a particularly relevant, and I can say that with Bow Street.
And I don't think we need that. We just want, I mean, you know, we really are just looking for someone to say, well, we're acting on the recommendation of our Historic Preservation Commission, who's just saying this is why this building is special.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, I'm inclined to agree with David. I think there needs to be some sort of threshold of distinction that's necessary, and I think to David's point, it is helpful to have that distinction available for precedence purposes, for equity reasons, for future applicants, and other considerations. I just have a one item, Roberta, and you don't necessarily have to answer it during this conversation. This may be or something that requires some research, but if we were to have a temporary deed restriction for this applicant, since it's a condominium, are there any impacts to the bylaws that we would need to, the condominium bylaws that we would need to consider as part of this award, should the committee decide to make this award? So something for you to maybe consider for next.
That's actually a question that was addressed in my question to the legal department. So they are looking into that. And that is like something that might be incorporated into, similar with the Adams Lagoon House. We had them sign. The reason why it hasn't gone to city council is because we asked them to sign an agreement saying that they would accept the conditions and gave them the exact what the conditions would be before accepting the grant. And I think we would have to do a similar thing here of ask them to sign an acknowledgement that we will accept this grant under these conditions before we ask city council to approve the funds. So the trust, the condominium trustees would need to agree to a change in bylaws if necessary to enable them to do that. And the other thing I wanted to mention, pertinent to the discussion you've just been having about what the threshold is, the CPC did early on give a less than $5,000 grant to a private residence to restore a historic feature of the house. And you felt that when you consider the Adams Magoon House, that was a large grant and it required that the Historical Commission declare this house to be uniquely significant to Somerville's history. So it was like a higher level of importance of that building to be recognized to merit a large grant of that size. What we are missing is maybe what that threshold would be between the small grant and the large grant, and maybe thinking about what that threshold would be a way to help move forward the conversation. And I recognize, again, you may not arrive at a consensus tonight or even next month on this particular project. So I want to let you decide, how much you want to discuss this tonight, but we don't have to have all of the answers at the end of this discussion.
Right. I mean, I'm inclined to agree with that assessment. I know that we do have a lot of other projects, other applicants to discuss. So I think we've had a good conversation here. There's a few items that we do need to think about, both as committee members, but also, Roberta, based off of your conversations, perhaps an update for our December meeting.
And
So, yeah.
The thing that I would like to get an answer before the next meeting, though, if that would be helpful, is whether you want to set a threshold for what you think a large project is that requires the input from the Historical Commission, that this merits a large grant, because I'd want to go to the Historical Commission and request that before the next meeting if need be. So I don't know if you want to just make the request that I ask for that from the Historical Commission, and you can come back to what the threshold is later, or if you want to agree on what that threshold is that this project merits.
Sure. So I wanted to see if anyone has a thought on a numerical amount for a threshold for this meeting. If not, we can always have, Roberta, what you mentioned, just move things forward. And then we could use the opportunity to think about and re-engage on a numerical threshold conversation. So I wanted to see if anyone has any numbers that are coming up that might be helpful for us to use as a starting point.
Did we not have, before my time here, a fund that was for small historic projects that we ended up not using and returning?
Yeah,
Did
that
that
was-
have a threshold on it for things?
I think the threshold for that was either 10,000 or 15,000, which was a very small grant given historic preservation. There are few projects that are likely to come up that will meet the requirements. So that was one of the reasons why that was a very difficult program to administer.
I think of those kinds of grants being more as sort of like a way of offsetting the cost of between window options or something, rather than funding full scale, which I think is still a worthwhile use for that money. Telling someone we're going to pay, here's $10,000, buy wood windows instead of vinyl.
Did that program actually happen? Because I kind of vaguely remember there being talk about it, but I wasn't sure if it was ever implemented, because maybe
It was never implemented. It was finally canceled. And I see that Alan has a hand up.
Alan, please.
Or does he? No, I'm sorry. That was my own hand in front of Alan's
I
screen.
see.
Never mind.
Sure. So the $10,000 to $15,000 threshold, it sounds like it wouldn't really apply to most projects from, I guess, a historic preservation consideration.
like Eric said, it sounds like it was more like, if it'll cost you $15,000 more to do it the way we'd prefer to see you do it.
Right.
Not so much, here's $15,000 to do the facade of your building.
Right. Just looking to see if there are any thoughts. If not, we can have Roberta move things forward as
Any number
discussed.
we come up with is gonna be kind of arbitrary. I mean,
It will be.
unless we have like some sort of an underlying, like I was kind of trying to think whether somehow or another a percent of the value of a property or something can be used as a threshold, some sort of percentage of the appraised value, so that we're trying to make something which is because I think the sort of thing when we're talking about, wanting to try and claw back is that we're giving you so much money that it'll make a difference with regard to what you might do and how much you might make, and
Right.
so maybe it's not so much an absolute figure as it is a percent of what you might reap from flipping it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought. Roberta, with respect to the appraisal consideration, how would that come into play based on what David's saying? I think, and I'm just gonna come up with a figure. Let's just say it's 10% of the value for a particular for a particular project. What would be the mechanism? What would the mechanism look like? Would we ask the owner or owners to undertake a appraisal, submit a copy of the appraisal, and then you make the determination off of that? Or has this been considered in other communities that you know of?
I think that going off of an appraisal would be a very high bar for entry because that's a considerable expense to obtain an appraisal. But if you wanted something very simple, you could go to the assessed valuation. That's a number that you can pull instantly without any cost. So a percentage of the assessed valuation. I would want to, perhaps this is some homework to ask committee members to do before the next meeting, is to think about what you think would be a threshold. And maybe if we just know that this project exceeds whatever that threshold is going to be, that it's a large project, then we go forward and treat this as a large project, and we need to go back in the future to define what a large project is.
Right. I think that's a great path forward. So that will give us, as committee members, an opportunity to think through this. Before we move on to the next applicant, I just wanted to make sure, any other lingering thoughts? Anyone else has anything else to say regarding what we just discussed? Seeing
I just
none?
want to say that I perceive them as good stewards. They have been doing a number of special assessments and a lot of this work on their own, and they're asking for the grant money for just this very public based. And I feel like they're obviously invested in the building, and it's very publicly located. So I would give it probably a 1 in our priority list. Or
Agreed, Heather. And I think Ryan had also expressed a similar sentiment. I think, considering, I mean, at this point, if we say it's a 1 and then there's asterisks for additional discussions, I think that's reasonable for us to move things forward.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I think and I don't want us to undercut the important historic preservation work we kind of want to do because of these barriers. But by the same token, I am concerned about how do we say no to another person if we say yes to this person. And so I do think that we need to have some sort of guidelines, about how we made a decision and why it was okay here and why it's okay for us to say no in this other case. That I think is more important to me than whether we actually do this project or not. But I don't disagree that that their intent to do the right thing here is good.
Absolutely, David. I think you're echoing many of the sentiments that we've shared as a committee. So thank you for that. Okay. Moving on to 1170 Broadway restoration and renewal.
Wait one moment.
Oh, sure, Roberta.
Okay. So the 1170 Broadway is not moving forward. That was an application that the applicant submitted an EDF, but decided that they're not ready this year for a full application. So the
Great.
next one that we have is the external siding renovations for Elizabeth Peabody House.
So I wanted to open up the discussion to see how the committee feels about the actual request, which is for 172,000.
Mhm.
Is there a general sentiment of support for funding the request here?
Yes, I'm in strong support of the application.
Yeah, same here.
They're a good organization. It's an important building. It's in a part of town that, I mean, everything's good about that.
Right, houses a number of small nonprofits doing good community stuff.
From a neighborhood aesthetic standpoint, I think improving buildings in that stretch of Broadway is good. It benefits the city. So I think that's an important one too.
I'm also in support of this application for all the reasons mentioned. Does anyone have any concerns that they want to share at this time? Seeing none. So Roberta, if it's all right with you, if you would list priority one for this.
Yes. So yes, I have your priority score for the Elizabeth Peabody House. Moving on to the Department of Veterans Services.
Yes, I know we briefly talked about it in the earlier part of the meeting. I wanted to see if anyone has any thoughts based off of whether it's the earlier discussion or just looking at the application itself, and if there's any support or concerns that they would like to share at this time.
I'm not really qualified to assess the physical, the state of things and needs. It's not my area of expertise. Obviously, anything that helps honor veterans and that I think is a noble cause. So I think it's important that way. Is it the kind of thing where if we don't do it this year, it'll fall apart? I don't know, but I think it's definitely worthwhile that way.
I know we talked about it briefly at the beginning, and I know that they revised, their application to reflect the comments and when we met with them a month or two ago. And they added a kind of, I guess, an appraisal. But they still wanted $100,000, I think, for actual work. It's unclear, and I haven't had a chance to go back and look at the project. And I say, given the fact that they kind of took our advice and agreed that they need to do a deeper assessment, is the 100,000 for work still justified? Or should that all be kind of contingent on the additional assessment?
Right. And I may be reading something. Thank you, David. I may be reading something off a little bit, but I think it was 100,000. That was it was like I don't want to use the word contingency. It was a commitment that the department was seeking from the CPC. If I understand this correctly, Roberta, is that the right understanding?
It's an advance commitment for
Advance
the construction, and the construction would not commence until they have a scope that's identified from the study that they're commissioning from the conservator.
So is the application premature?
Um,
I mean, I don't,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, I don't know.
That's for your,
I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think that's an important question that we should discuss. I also see Ryan's hand up. Ryan, please go right ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna make the same comment as David, so thanks for that. Yeah, the original proposal for the hard cost was 133,000, I believe. So I would guess that the 100,000 is meant to roughly approximate that, but the fact that there's no kind of basis behind that, and we don't know what the refreshed scope is going to look like. I'm fully in favor of the study, and would vote to approve that right now. But agree that some more clarity would be needed in terms of the hard costs for me to get behind it.
Right.
Is the study eligible? Can we fund the study?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Thank you, Ryan. I'm generally in favor of the study as well as discussed. However, the $100,000 amount does give me pause, just because if we're talking about like advanced funding commitment, what is the true actual cost? Keeping in mind that, of course, I'm supportive of any restoration efforts and honoring the veterans. So I think I think, David, what you raised earlier is also going through my mind around, is the application in full premature at this time? Or do we, with our funding commitment, will that help the department secure additional funds should they decide to apply for additional funds? And that part, Roberta, I think we would need to also consider if that's the case.
Did they provide a schedule for doing that assessment? Like, is it within our funding cycle, or is that gonna take a year?
The assessment is within the funding cycle. I don't know exactly how long the assessment would take. It would probably be completed in time for them to be able to apply for the next funding round. But I'm not sure if I have this information, if it's in the memo that I gave you, or if I have it in the budget form, the revised budget form that they gave me. I'm looking to see if I can pull that up. What they had, here we go. This is the information that I should have given you, which was missing, and I will share it with you. That explains why they were looking for the advanced funding commitment. If I can share this budget. So we can see on the screen the additional funding sources that they're looking for. The SHRAB Veterans Heritage Grant, that's from the state, 50/50 contribution. The application deadline is December 5th. So given that during the regular funding cycle, the decisions are usually made in or around December, and then the funding commitment is made when the city council approves it in or around January. They might need to request an off-cycle application in order to have a funding commitment by December 5th next year. So that's what they're trying to avoid, is having to make an off-cycle application.
I'm sorry, December 5th, 2024 or 2025?
So each year, the applications for the SHRAB grants are due in early December.
Yeah, so we wouldn't make a decision by December 5th, 2024, no matter what.
Right. And next year, if they come during the regular funding cycle, they'll be in the same position again.
Right.
So that's why they wanted, and also the VA Veterans Cemetery Grant, the application will be submitted July 1st. So the funding commitment would line up for both of those grant cycles if you were to commit the funds now. Maybe they might have a study so that they could present an off-cycle application later in the spring. So it's possible that they would be able to if you didn't give them the commitment now, that they might be able to come back later with an off-cycle application later this year. But we can anticipate that would be an off-cycle application so that they can be able to apply for those other grants.
So Roberta, this supplemental information or additional information is very helpful. I do have a follow-up question, and this is going to be for the applicant, if we're permitted to ask this. It would be around the second grant. I think it was called the VA grant. It doesn't have any dollars or matching percentages listed. It might be helpful for us to know what those amounts might be, because we understand for the first one, the SHRAB, it's December 5th, it's 50%. I think it's $1 for dollar if I read that correctly. But I think it might be helpful for us to know that as well, the potential grant amount that could be secured.
I'll pass that question on.
I'm
Thank
sort
you
of
so much, Roberta. Eric,
feeling
please go ahead.
if I may, that the idea of an off-cycle thing is seeming a little bit more palatable, because I mean, 50% of whatever the study says is a big chunk of money. And what if they say it's only $160,000 project and suddenly we over granted or something? As long as we just allow in our minds that we might be asked for 100 grand or whatever before the next funding round. To me, that sort of allows it to be a more exact solution to this situation. I would like to make sure they get funded ultimately, but I think it just
Right.
a little bit early, as you said.
Right. Thank you, Eric. I think you made some really great points. Heather, I think I see your hand as well.
Yeah, I just think that I was kind of going back from the July 1st deadline and thinking that means that like city council would have to vote on it. And if you don't want to, like May or June, which means they'd have to do the off cycle by April or something. By April, they won't even have their $18,000 grant money to do the survey yet, because it takes so long for these grants to actually get dispersed. So I think kind of just looking at that, it makes me sort of understand and want to support more their kind of preloading it in order to leverage these other grants, just because it is a very slow moving machine.
That's a really good point. I would just want to point out that for city departments, it doesn't take as long to have the grant funds available as it takes for our private nonprofit partners. That contract period is not as lengthy a process for city departments, but that nevertheless, getting in line with whatever whether they go with the firm that submitted the estimate, or if they have another firm that prepares the project, getting the project completed in that amount of time is still questionable. But to the previous question, I think it would be helpful to find out more about the VA grant in July and whether they're dependent on a match for the VA grant, because that's not clear from the information that's given right now. So I'll forward that question to them.
Great. So it seems like there is a general consensus around this funding the study, the 18,000. I think in general there's broad support for that. There's also support for a future funding need based off of the study, as well as understanding what the matching grants, at least the SHRAB matching grant, the VA might be either a match or fixed amount. We'll find out. There is definitely support for that, but a need for additional clarity. That's what I'm sensing based off of what we just discussed. Wanted to see how we want to prioritize this. I know we've been putting one in many instances. Is this a two for us, or does everyone think it's still one?
Well,
Well, I think you have to parse it. I mean, I would say funding the study is a 1.
Right.
You can say, so the amount that we're proposing funding is the 18 whatever.
Mhm.
And yeah, to me, that's, but I don't think I support funding the whole.
Mhm.
So it's not, so it's a 3 or lower.
Sure. Any other thoughts based on what David has mentioned? So I'm inclined to agree with you, David. I mean, I do think that funding the study could be a 1, and then based on the additional information provided that we have, that we have requested here, the remaining could be, at least for this cycle, could be a 2 or 3, I would say.
I mean,
So if
I'm even wary of them using the fact that we awarded the 100,000
Mhm.
for them to use that as an application for other funding. I even feel like that's a little weird. I'm not wild about them saying, "Oh, but Somerville, CPA gave us $100,000 to do the work, so you guys should give us the 50,000 or whatever."
that's a good point. We don't know.
No, yeah, we don't know.
We don't know. We just
Well,
don't know.
we've
So
done that with
Mhm.
the blessings of the Bay in order for them to leverage additional funding. We've often considered how the CPA funds help them.
But before they knew
help
what work,
grantees.
before they knew what work had to be done, or just in order to help them leverage other funding for work that
They
we
were in
agreed.
design. They were in design. They had an area identified, and they were still doing their design.
Yeah, no, I mean, and this again, going back to the points we've been talking about already, this is, I guess, why I like there to be kind of these guidelines, so that it's not, so these aren't slippery slopes.
And it
Right.
may
Please.
happen that the committee is not that you think differently about projects as you go along and move the bar on some of the precedents that you set. So it's not set in stone. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness about how you arrive at these decisions.
Right. Right. I agree. So I think for the purposes, at least for the purpose of the discussion this evening, I think we could attach a 1 to the $18,000 study. I think that's where we can at least land on for this evening.
Mhm.
All right, I would love to take that information and I'll get the information that you asked me for, and we'll move on to the Somerville Museum,
Yes.
which is the balance of their FY24 grant that wasn't funded last year. And so this would be for 114,259. And this was for the scope elements, including the archives and the furniture and the iron railing in front of their building.
Great. Thank you, Roberta, for the introduction. I would, I know that we have been supporting the Somerville Museum, and it's a great institution, a great cultural institution. I would like to get some thoughts on what is our appetite to continue the support, either in full or partial support for the request made.
No, I generally support the project. I think this is something, we had them, we didn't fund it last year. We had them do higher priority work. We said, come back next year for this, and I think that's what they're doing. So I feel like they're doing what we asked them to do.
Thank you, David. Any other thoughts?
I guess.
I agree. Nothing more.
Thank you, Ryan. Eric, I think you had some thoughts as well, please.
No, I would agree with it's a little bit different because we're talking about things about belongings, and it's not like the furniture is going to fall apart if it doesn't get painted this year. However, in their defense, that what they're all about is their belongings. They are housing these things, that they're showcasing them. So it's their building is the contents of the building, and in a way, it's important all around. And as you said, that we did put them off by a year last time around, so they did wait.
Right. I mean, in general, I'm in agreement. I consider this to be a one funding in full, simply because I recognize that with the Somerville Museum, it will be I'm going to say multi-funding cycle commitment for this committee to consider, because there are various areas of need, and so I think that they have been working with us when we had the constraints last year, and we gave a partial award. So I would say one would be appropriate here as well. I'm just being mindful of the time. I just wanted to see if no one has any comments regarding the Somerville Museum, we could perhaps, Roberta, move on to Quincy Street, open space renovation into the open space recreation area.
Sure. Actually, I would say, yeah, why don't we go ahead with the Quincy Street open space renovation area? This was the resurfacing of the area that right now has a boardwalk on the Quincy Street park, and to refresh the plantings that were planted when the park was originally renovated many years ago.
Great, thank you so much, Roberta. Ryan, I see your hand up. Please go right ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm looking in the right spot. I had asked in the last meeting for a corrected budget submission because there were items that were incorrectly included in the scope, namely a water fountain and some other things. And I'm seeing them again in the revised information that was uploaded. So I just want to confirm before I say that I think this is definitely getting knocked down and by me in terms of priority until a future submission. But Roberta, just wanted to check and make sure that's the right stuff.
I want to make sure that I gave you the version, so I'm opening the budget summary.
It does say revised for what that's
I'm
worth.
sorry?
It does say revised in the title for whatever that's worth, but it's still
Okay, and it says Quincy Street. And so not the budget summary, but the detailed budget form includes hardscape, planting, and drinking fountain. And you said that the drinking fountain was intended to not be included?
Yes, according to John last month, and he said that was included in error.
Okay, so let me check with John again, and I will ask specifically about that and have him resubmit another budget form by next month.
Okay, great. Would love to support this project, but can't feel like I can until I understand what it's for.
Okay.
Right. Thank you so much, Ryan. Wanted to see if anyone else had any thoughts, and including what Ryan had mentioned regarding the need to update the budget. Sorry, Laura, did you have any thoughts? I didn't mean
I was
to
just gonna say
Yeah.
thank Ryan for catching that, because on balance overall, it definitely would be one that I'd support, like as a high priority. The renovations, the park itself, the project itself.
Great, thank you so much, Laura.
I would too.
So sorry, Eric, please go ahead.
No, I would too. We have
Yeah.
relatively few opportunities to invest in open space in a way that
Yeah.
benefits people around. So I think we should kind of jump at any of these. This is a good one.
That's what I mean, I think what Ryan pointed out is instrumental here, so it would be a one with the caveat of these, of seeing the updated budget before we
Yeah.
do a formal vote.
All right.
Great.
So I think we have the consensus for that project. Let's move on to the Nunziato Field.
Yes. So this is the field water fountain, from what I understand, and I know that we had some great questions and during the post-applicant presentation. Wanted to see if there's support for this for the water fountain endeavor, or if there are any concerns that anyone wants to share.
What was the budget? 200,000?
200,000.
Yes.
I'm a little
Thank you.
confused in this, and so water fountain is okay here, but it wasn't okay in the Quincy Street Park.
I believe if I can, David, it's just that their proposal for the renovations at the Quincy Street open space did not include a drinking fountain. So it was erroneously included in the
Oh, so
budget.
there's not going to be a drinking fountain, period. It's not a question of
That's
whether
right.
it's eligible or not eligible.
That's right.
We're paying for a
Right.
drinking fountain they're not putting in.
Exactly.
Right. All right, thank you.
Other than being surprised at how expensive things are in
Yeah.
general, I think the drinking fountains is one of my pet peeves is we don't have more of them. So
Agreed with that.
it's good.
Right.
And similar to the Quincy Street project, it's another open space project that you know, we it seems perfect to fund, you know, given the scope of what we do. So I'd prioritize that one.
Only
Thank you, Laura.
Only if it was making more open space.
So it seems like the consensus here is in support, so we can allocate as priority one here.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the last project is the Open Space Acquisition Fund for $300,000.
So wanted to get some thoughts. The fund will allow the city of Somerville to expand open space. I wanted to see if what's the appetite for support, number one, and number two, are we looking at us supporting or funding in full or partial? Ryan, I see your hand up. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
so this one I was thinking about over the last month. So it sounds like we've consolidated around the idea that this proposal is for $300,000. And Roberta, I think that's what was in your budget summary. However, the way that it was written was basically asking for a cash sweep at the end of the year of whatever is in there, which I personally, I don't feel super comfortable with. I don't know what lies ahead. I don't want to set that precedent necessarily for people to come in and say, "Oh, we'll take whatever you can, whatever you can give us at the end of the year." So even though I understand it is just to replenish the fund, they don't have a specific parcel that they're targeting. I feel better about this with a set amount, even though I would guess that said amount was probably pulled out of the air. But I'm a big fan of their work, so I'll leave it at that.
I do just want to give some comment as to how they arrived at 300,000, and you are correct. It was just looking at what is the maximum amount of funding that might be available and choosing that. Prior to most of us being in our roles serving the Community Preservation Committee, there had been a previous year when they requested $50,000 and then realized that more funding might have been available and the committee would like to have given them a significantly larger amount of funds for the Open Space Acquisition Fund that year. And they were advised by the law department at that time that the committee could not arbitrarily increase by order of magnitude a request. You can reduce by order of magnitude a request, but you can't increase it. So that's why they picked the maximum amount with the assumption that you would pick how much you actually wanted to designate to the project, that they could go down but not up, or you could go down but not up in your decision.
Thank you, Roberta. Ryan, I think you might have some additional thoughts here.
Understood. That makes sense. I guess then what I'm hearing is that may be in the short term, some award or not, and then a desire to revisit at the end of the fiscal year, basically, in light of anything else that may have come in the door, and see if we want to award further funds up to this $300,000 maximum. Is that anybody else hearing that, feeling that?
So Ryan, I'm gonna say I'm in broad terms inclined to agree with you. The other aspect of it is I know, Roberta, we don't expect any, and correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to off-cycle funding requests to come in the open space recreation area, but I'm also trying to be mindful of that potential. Again, it's hard, no one has a crystal ball, it's hard to say. But in broad terms, Ryan, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But I would also like other committee members to also weigh in on this as well.
So
Sorry,
well, when it's my turn,
you can go ahead, David, please.
I think this is a really interesting discussion, because I was starting to think what I'd really like to see the city do each year is basically ask for the full allocation that could be hypothetically available, for open space and recreation, and then us, change it downward based on the other applications we get. But I think the discussion about the idea of off-cycle opportunities coming up is an interesting one. And it kind of, to me, it kind of begs the question, what limitations are there on money that's in the open space acquisition fund? And to what extent is there some flexibility to use that money for an off-cycle project that comes up that we wanted to try and fund, or the city wanted to try and fund?
Right.
And whether, and it's kind of, I guess it's a question of, what does acquisition mean? Is it only for like buying, does acquisition mean what it seems like acquisition means? Or is it a little bit more flexible?
Right. David, I think that's a fantastic question. Roberta, I'm not sure if you have a response or background information on that.
So open space acquisition is specifically referring to acquiring land for open space.
Right. So once it's in there, which is
Yeah.
fine. But it does make, I think, the conversation about, do we categorically want to sweep all, like have Somerville apply for, all the money that hypothetically could be available, so we could sweep it all into that, or not? And the
Right.
short answer is just maybe not. Maybe we want to have a reserve.
And maybe a little bit more background information for those of you who haven't been here for the previous runs when they received funds for this purpose. They have over 3 different funding rounds, accumulated $500,000 toward their open space acquisition fund. So that includes, so they have not, I think the largest award so far has been for $250,000. So, I think any amount is reasonable. And maybe this is another one that you want to go home and think some more about how much you would want to award. Maybe we don't reach a consensus tonight about the amount, but
Right.
there's a lot of food for thought.
That's good.
Right.
Question.
Eric, please go ahead.
Just the history
Please.
of this. Has this fund ever been used to purchase property in the past?
Not yet.
This is basically, the idea is to have a big cash, because when open space becomes available, it's not like you can pay $50,000 for
Yeah.
property. You're looking at a few $1 million to get it.
Have a big sale.
So I can see the rationale behind it.
Right. No, and that's why I'm a big booster of it, and I kind of really kind of pushed the city to do it, because I think last year or the year before, they didn't, and like Roberta said, we can't do it for them. They have to ask for it.
Right. I think there's some great points that were made this evening. I would say that in broad terms, we are, as a committee, in support, but perhaps not the full amount. And the amount that we would feel comfortable would be something that we would I would encourage all of us to mull over as we, as we go into the December meeting. I think that's probably where we could leave the conversation here, unless anyone has like a massive objection to this. I think Roberta, I think that's probably going to be the way forward here.
Okay, got it. I'll make a note of that.
Thank you.
Thank you all. In light of the time, there are a couple of important decisions or announcements that need to be made. So
Sure.
I would suggest that we skip the discussion on general funding conditions, but I would encourage committee members to take some time to look at the notes that were included in the meeting packet so that you can at least have some ideas in mind as you discuss the conditions at the next meeting. And we may at a future time come back and have more discussion about conditions, but at least I'd like you to have some background and some input to help you at the next meeting.
Sure.
So the CPC business, the most important first discussion that we need to have is the next meeting. It has been the CPC's custom to move the December meeting up by either 1 or 2 weeks, to be on either the second or third week, depending on when the holidays fall. And it's ambiguous. It's not clear to me which is the preferable date. So would you all prefer to have the next meeting on December 11 or December 18?
So Roberta, thank you for presenting this. Before we discuss the 11th versus 18th, I know that there are a number of items that came out of our deliberations this evening, and I just want to make sure that you and your colleagues have enough time to secure the necessary answers for those items that we mentioned. And if you feel like the 11th is too soon, because today's the 20th, for you to be able to secure the answers, then perhaps there might be a slight preference for the 18th. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. I believe that I can meet either of the meeting dates. It's possible. I'm not worried about not
Okay.
having the materials prepared for you, but perhaps if you can use the raise hand function and everyone raise your hand if you are not available on the 18th. Everyone is available on the 18th. Then maybe we
Appears so.
can have the next meeting on the 18th. That would be the preferable date.
Sounds
I would
great.
actually prefer the 11th if that worked for.
Okay, so
Mm.
raise your hand if you are not available on the 11th. Is there anyone else who has a strong preference between the two dates?
I kind of lean towards the 11th only because red line closures they were tonight, which is why I was late, and they're that week as well, and I commute by subway
Sure.
and it was a little miserable today. And like I said, that's why I'm late. So I'm looking at my calendar. I see there's red line closure on the 18th, but not on the 11th. So I'm leaning that way personally, but that's because my
Sure.
experience tonight.
Good point.
Laura, I think I'm glad you raised it, and Heather, thank you for mentioning it. I think as long as there are no objections to the 11th, and as long as you can secure the necessary responses, Roberta, I think December 11th is the way to go.
Okay, we'll do it. All right, so the next important thing to mention, sorry, I just closed the candidate selection update, just very quickly, we are on target to have a new candidate be approved by City Council by the end of this calendar year. Amazingly, everyone has been working on time through this process, so I can't announce yet who the selected candidate 2 positions will be. But we should, by the next meeting, I think, be able to either make an announcement or we'll definitely know by January. So then the upcoming officer election, next meeting, an important order of business is that we need to elect a new chair and vice chair for the next calendar year. So please consider if you would be willing to serve as the chair or vice chair for next calendar year. And I encourage Jahan to maybe reach out if you think you have some ideas about who you would encourage to serve. Please. I hope that we will have a chance to think about that and be able to make nominations and vote at the next meeting. And the one last thing that I would mention is that we all agreed on December 3 as a date for a social meeting. So I look forward to seeing all of you then, and I will have some information forthcoming about where to meet. And please, if you have any suggestions, send them to me. As it turned out the last time, I just ended up calling around until I could find someone who would accommodate us, and that might be the same thing that happens this time, but
Great.
we'll try.
So thank you so much, Roberta, for organizing this, and of course, I'll heed your advice regarding encouraging current committee members to serve. I think it's a really rewarding experience. At least it has been. It has been, and I don't want to speak for you, Ryan, but between Ryan and I think we've had a lot of great opportunities here to shape the conversation, move things forward. So please do think about it. I think it's a great opportunity for you to also not only serve but also make that impact. So thank you for that. Besides these items that we've discussed, I just wanted to ask if there's anything else that any of the committee members want to bring up for the good of the meeting, or as we look at the December 11th meeting, anything else that might have a light bulb that might have gone off, gone on rather, while we were having the discussions, anything that we need to keep in mind while we still have Roberta, of course, helping us with the research and also getting answers for any items.
Roberta, can you remind me who is aging out, so to speak, of the committee in January? I know Jahan and someone
And
else.
Laura.
Laura.
Yeah, Jahan and Laura terming out, sadly. And we will have 3 new members in January.
Wow, that'd be
Three.
really different.
Yes, it is.
Oh, one
Can you
coming from the
invite them
planning.
can you invite them
We're
to
miss-
join us in December for December 3rd? Is that allowed?
Unfortunately, we won't have a final determination of who they will be in
Oh,
December.
okay. So 3 new, so they're not selected yet.
So I don't know about the planning board. So one of the members will be represented, will be a representative from the planning board. So I don't know if the planning board has already determined who will be taking Jahan's place.
So if I may, Roberta, there hasn't been a determination, and I think, and you may want to check with Stephen on this. We do have a planning board meeting tomorrow evening, and I'm not sure if he's invited you to it, because the last planning board meeting, we were kind of in a similar situation. We're running out of time, and the chair, Mike Capuano, said that since you weren't available that day, it might be better for us to table the discussion to the next meeting. So I would recommend that you check with Stephen on that.
Okay. He didn't mention that to me, but I'll check with him.
Just in case. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm just thinking completely just from the social side of it. Anyone that is named that we can, that we can meet in December and not come in, and have to wait till next December for us to have a social outing would be nice.
All right. So I will look into whether we know who can attend from the planning board yet. If we have someone, a new representative named by then, we can invite them. The other 2 general public members, unfortunately, we won't know who they are yet. So.
I'm glad you raised this from a social standpoint, David, because we have had limited opportunities to meet, and those opportunities to meet in person have been terrific. So thank you so much for that. Wanted to see if there were any other non-agenda items that are of note or relevance for the good of the meeting. Well, seeing none, I just want to thank everyone for a very engaging conversation. The deliberations were really some great points being mentioned here. Look forward to our next meeting on December 11th. And I hope everyone has a great evening, and thank you again for all your input. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, wait, I'm
Motion
sorry.
to adjourn, right?
Yes, motion to
right.
adjourn from Laura.
Yes.
I'll
And-
make it.
I didn't hear who seconded it.
I second it.
There you go.
All right. And I'm going to quickly call the roll. Jahan,
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Heather. yes.
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
and Joe.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care now.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.